Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are jumping straight into how a 2002 romantic comedy somehow completely defied a brutal critical consensus to become this massive cultural and financial success. We're talking, of course, about 2 Weeks' Notice, starring Sandra Bullock and Hugh Grant. It's honestly a fascinating case study in how star power, perfect timing, and, those familiar genre formulas interact with what audiences actually want. So let's just break the whole thing down right now. I literally love starting with this because despite taking an absolute thrashing from critics, like this incredibly harsh take from Rex Reed of the New York Times, the film still managed to rake in nearly $200 million globally. Think about that contrast for a second. The critics absolutely roasted this film, calling it predictable and tired, yet audiences, they turned out in droves. How exactly does a movie pull off that kind of balancing act, completely ignoring the professionals, to totally win over the public? All right, here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the classic rom-com setup. Second, how chemistry overcomes cliches. Third, we'll explore the film's role as a love letter to New York City. Fourth, we'll dive into the critics versus the box office. And finally, we'll wrap up with the infamous apostrophe and the film's legacy. Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1, the classic rom-com setup. To really get why the critics were rolling their eyes, we have to look at the film's highly predictable, formulaic baseline. This setup right here brilliantly illustrates the classic opposites attract trope that the entire narrative is built on. On one side, we have Lucy Kelson. She's this idealistic, pro bono environmental lawyer who spends her days literally throwing herself in front of wrecking balls. And then, on the other side, we have George Wade. He's a needy, narcissistic, billionaire real estate playboy. And, you guessed it, his company is the one swinging those very wrecking balls. It is the ultimate odd couple clash designed from the ground up to just generate maximum friction. So from there, the plot goes exactly where you expect it to go, right? It hits every single expected genre beat along the way. Lucy agrees to work for George's firm, but strictly to save her childhood community center. Pretty quickly, she becomes his completely indispensable aide, to the point where he can't even pick out an outfit without calling her. Utterly frustrated by his exhausting neediness, she gives her 2 weeks' notice. Then, when George looks at a young, attractive lawyer named June to replace her, Lucy gets incredibly jealous. And, surprise, surprise, by the end of the film, they realize they are entirely in love. No massive, mind-bending plot twists here, folks. Moving right along to Section 2, chemistry overcomes cliches. So, you might be wondering, if the plot is that predictable, how does the movie actually elevate itself? Well, it deploys the ultimate secret weapon, undeniable on-screen chemistry. Sandra Bullock actually gave this hilarious, super self-deprecating explanation for their banter. She said, "You're dealing with two very manic, egotistical, moronic people such as Hugh and myself, and it just worked." The writer and director, Mark Lawrence, essentially wrote a two-person play tailored perfectly to their strengths. Bullock pointed out that she and Grant share a highly sarcastic dynamic in real life. And while that sarcasm doesn't always translate well into, say, print interviews, it translated into absolute pure gold on the screen. And this dynamic really worked because it was built on a foundation of genuine mutual respect behind the scenes. Bullock had immense respect for Grant's comedic timing. She noted that he makes it look so effortless that he honestly doesn't get enough credit for his absolute brilliance as a performer. And despite Grant's public persona as, well, a bit of a womanizing rogue, Bullock said of him, "He's truly caring and lovable, but I don't think that that's something that he wants the press to know." That real-life mutual appreciation translates directly into the comforting, authentic dynamic the audience completely fell in love with. All right, let's jump into Section 3, a love letter to NYC. Beyond the stars themselves, the actual production of this movie carries some really profound historical context. Getting this movie made was incredibly taxing. Writer and first-time director Mark Lawrence paid a heavy, heavy physical toll to get this production finished. Just look at this ridiculous list of ailments he suffered during the shoot. Headaches, sinus infections, a root canal, and a slip disc. He literally poured his blood, sweat, and teeth into this project, navigating enormous logistical hurdles to bring this romantic vision to life. But shifting gears for a second, this shoot was incredibly significant for New York City itself. This was actually the first major Hollywood production to shoot in New York post 9/11. The mayor's office was super eager to show the world that the city was resilient and still shining. Because of this, the production was granted unprecedented access to locations that are normally incredibly difficult to secure. We're talking spectacular helicopter shots swooping right around the Chrysler Building. Sandra Bullock explicitly stated she wanted to glamorize the city where she got her career start. And that made this movie a beautiful, sweeping visual tribute to New York at a time when it was deeply, deeply needed. Which brings us to Section 4, critics versus the box office. Let's circle back to that ultimate clash we teased at the very beginning. Reviewers were simply not impressed with the lack of originality here, often resorting to, well, scathing culinary metaphors. Just listen to Peter Bradshaw of The Guardian, who wrote, "The spark isn't there and the soufflé doesn't rise." Ouch. Critics felt the script completely lacked the sharp dialogue of other contemporary British rom-coms. They really hammered the film, calling it nothing more than a lazy, paint-by-numbers exercise in genre filmmaking. But when we compare that critical data to the audience reception, we see a massive disconnect. Critics handed out dismal 42s across the board on Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic. But the audience score? A very solid B+ on CinemaScore. The audience absolutely did not care about the cliches. You have to remember, the world was dealing with incredibly heavy realities at the time, especially right after 9/11. Audiences simply weren't looking for a gritty, unpredictable drama. They desperately wanted a fun, comforting, and visually beautiful experience anchored by two intensely charming leads. And that is exactly what they got. And if you want proof, just look at this global box office gross, $199 million. That completely proves that star chemistry and a comforting formula can absolutely dominate the financial charts. It opened at number 2 domestically, sitting right behind the massive pop culture juggernaut that was The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. And it impressively managed to stay in the top 10 for its first 5 weeks in theaters. It's a true testament to giving the audience exactly what they want, right when they need it most, completely defying professional consensus. Finally, let's wrap up with Section 5, the apostrophe and legacy. I have to share one of the funniest pieces of trivia that cements this film's legacy in a completely unexpected way. So the grammatically correct spelling of the title actually requires an apostrophe after the S in weeks, rendering it 2 weeks, notice. Well, this missing punctuation enraged grammarians worldwide, turning the movie poster into a famous, literal textbook example of bad punctuation. Author Lynn Truss famously championed this exact error in her best-selling book on punctuation, Eats, Shoots, and Leaves. The original hardcover edition even featured Truss in her author photo, glaring right at the movie poster, holding a marker exactly where the apostrophe should be. Just brilliant. So, as we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with this thought to chew on. Think about what truly makes a movie memorable. Does magnetic star chemistry actually matter more to a cinematic legacy than a flawless, completely original script? 2 weeks' notice might have missed an apostrophe and definitely skipped a few points for originality, but it delivered the undeniable movie magic that audiences craved. Thank you so much for joining me on this dive into the data and the history. And hey, keep asking questions about the media you love.